crack that happens here, and you don't see it until after it's fired. If you get a piece that's been glaze fired, and you have a crack on the rim, that means you trimmed it too dry. So this is leather hard. So I'm going to show you a technique. There's a couple of techniques you can do when you trim a bowl. You can put a bowl just like right on your wheel head and hold it down with clay. The problem is, see this like area right here? Any of these higher areas are going to get smashed and get flat. And so you can do that, but there are other options. I have bat pins, and you can borrow my bat pins, but these bat pins are used to use a bat, and there's a foam bat. This is called a foam bat, and you can use this to trim a bowl. I really like these, but these have been highly abused. You can tell by, I don't know how somebody wears out this, but I mean, I have one in my studio I've used for 20 years and it's fine. But here at the studio, so I'll show you what this does. This is a foam bat, and what it does is the little air bubbles in the foam creates a little friction, so you can put your bowl on there and it just stays in place really nice. And if you don't know how to center like this, it's a good way to learn how to center, but you can also spin the wheel and center it. You can't push it on a foam bat, but you lift it up and set it down. But once you get it centered, you put a little pressure on here while you're trimming, and it's going to stay in place. And we have foam bats up there. That's one option. Another option is a carpet bat, and I made these carpet bats when I was working at Snow Canyon High School. They redid the carpet in the school, and they had tons of leftover chunks, and the carpet already had an adhesive on it. So the chunks were in the dumpster, and you can see the ceramics teacher dumpster diving. But I got a bunch of bats from the university and a bunch from the high school, and I just carpeted them because they're an easy way. So this isn't as soft and forgiving, but I'll show you how this works too. It's not as soft and forgiving, and if you're not careful, you can tear up your rim. But the fibers in the carpet do the exact same thing. See how that'll keep it in place, and it's not going to move. It's not moving at all. Does that make sense? So there's options. But the thing I discovered, when you use a bat with bat pins, sometimes the bats wobble. And so we started to use chamois to help the bats not wobble. Before we used chamois, we would put a little piece of paper towel in there and press our bats. So this makes your bats steady. So if you're using a bat, my recommendation is to use a chamois. Let's see. So see how it makes it really steady. But let's go to this wheel because I have the bat pins and they'll hit my thing. But the best way to trim a bowl is just with a chamois. I have a bunch of chamois up there. You get them wet, you rinse them out, and like this one's still a little bit, there's still a little bit of moisture in this one, but it's like, I'm gonna squeeze this into your bucket, Adam. But if you rinse them out good, they work really good. This is a chamois. This might have been a cooling cloth from Harbor Freight. Cooling cloths and chamois that you dry your car, not real lambskin chamois, but synthetic chamois work really good, and you get them at the automotive store. If you buy a chamois from the automotive store, you can make 2 chamois out of one of the things. It costs like 15 bucks for it. Anyways, if I put this chamois on, and then put this on, it does the same exact thing. And I think it's a little easier to use than those 2 things. But and we used to just solely use this, then we use carpet bats. Now we're mostly using chamois.
So the next thing.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get this centered. Remember, I'm not centering the rim, I'm just centering the foot. I'm centering where I'm going to trim. There we go. Okay, now if you use a chamois, you still have to lift it up, and you got to make sure your piece is leather hard and your chamois is not too wet. Because if you don't, you're just going to make a sloppy mess of your piece. So I think the chamois is a good alternative. Now, if you're using a cylinder, you're not supposed to. You only trim bowls and plates on a chamois. Is any of those leather hard? If you have something that's leather hard, you don't really put a cylinder on here because it has too narrow of a circumference and it'll tip over. So every time I introduce the chamois, somebody starts trimming their cups with it. and I tell you not to do it, but yeah, just chamois or bowls and plates. That's it. Everything else should be in a chuck, like what Adam's doing right there. He has a chuck. That's the way to do it. Okay. So let's center this on the chamois. I don't know. I'm gonna use the foam bat just because this is my wheel. I don't want to take my bat pins off. I'll show you another technique. Actually, could you grab me another chamois up there? There's one right there on that shelf, and a blue bat. Just a clean blue bat. There's one up there. There's some underneath the foam bats up there. See right there? On the other side. Right, yeah, those. Give me one of those. And then give me a chamois out of there. Half the fun part about using a chamois is saying the word chamois. Chamois is a fun word. It's just like pony roller. I use pony rollers a lot in my class, and I like ponies. And I had a pony growing up, and I like ponies. Her name was Sugar.
He's writing one down.
Oh yeah, he's getting me a chamois. And so, since I already have this, I'm going to use this like, I'm actually going to use this chamois. I'll put this chamois on the wheel. And sometimes if you want a little more cush, you can do a double chamois. This one's actually from a ceramics company that's called Zaim. You can order them. You can buy them at the Tilted Kiln if you want to buy your own chamois. But my recommendation is don't buy them at the Tilted Kiln. Just go to the automotive store. Go to O'Reilly's or whatever the automotive stores are around your neighborhood and buy one. And you can make 2 of them out of it. You just put them on the wheel, trace a circle with a Sharpie, cut them out with scissors. Okay, so we're going to put this chamois on here. And then I'll just use this wheel to trim. So getting it centered might be the challenge. There we go. Okay, let's trim this. This is a trimming tool I got up at the Tilted Kiln. It's kind of expensive, it's about 30 bucks, but it's a titanium blade, so it stays really sharp. These are a different one, but I like them both. So what we're gonna try to do is trim it like this, and we wanna make a proper foot so that when you glaze that, you can just sponge off your foot and you can have the inside. I think on a bowl, it's really important to have the inside glaze, just like on a plate. You don't have to glaze the inside, but I'm gonna show you this. I've left it a 1/2 inch thick so you can do that. So I'm gonna put a little pressure with my finger here. I'm gonna hold my hands together. The pressure is gonna keep the piece on the chamois. And we'll just take, so this is my form. So if you think about this, that much clay needs to come off to follow my form. So I'm just gonna try to follow my form first. I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, that the rule of thirds comes into play with trimming bowls. So if you look at this, that's about 1/3. So I would roughly say, like everybody says, well, how big do I make my foot? It should be 1/3 or a little bit smaller, or a little bit bigger. I think this is right about 1/3 right now, but I'm gonna make it a little smaller. So I'm following the profile of my form. And I'm gonna use the tip of my tool to create my outside foot. And I feel like a bowl should have a substantial outside foot to it. It's a visual ending point. It's like a pedestal for the form. If you look at this form, when it's sitting right side up, that's the visual ending point for this form, and there's a foot there. Also, that foot comes into play when you're glazing because you hold that foot to glaze it. If you don't have a foot on a bowl, it's impossible to glaze it unless you have glaze tongs. So let's put that there. So that's the kind of foot I'm gonna make. I'm gonna use the tip of my tool. I'm gonna create the undercut, or the outside foot. I usually just use my tool like that. And then I'll go from this point here to blend into my form. The last thing I wanna do on a bowl is to do something like this, where it's like trimmed like that, and then it comes like this, because that is the thicker part. I know that for a fact. I'm gonna trim that. I want it to be a transition. And then since I fluted this, I don't want to go too low. If I go too low, I'll start chopping into my fluting. I think, let's go just a little more here. I like a form or a foot that goes in and then out so it really catches the glaze. Bowls are great forms to really show off glazing. And you can do thicker glazing because if you glaze the inside, it's not going anywhere. It might make a puddle inside, but it's not going to go anywhere. So I did the outside foot. I've made a little angle here. This is my undercut shadow. Now I'm going to do the inside foot. I'm going to hold it really steady while I do that. And you have to be careful with the inside foot. If you're not careful, you can throw it off. And to emphasize this too, this is a bowl that goes like this, so the inside foot should go like that too. So right here should be as deep as the outside. So I'm going to trim this in a little deeper, and I always switch to this trimming tool. You guys got two trimming tools. I'm going to make an angle there because if I'm going to glaze the inside, I want the same elements on the inside as the outside. So there's an angle here. There's my foot. That's a little bit thick for me, but I'll change it after I get it trimmed. I don't want this to be super obvious. I want it to be kind of subtle. And I think the common mistake is students either don't put it in there or they make it too extreme. I'll check the thickness, make sure I'm not getting too thin. And then I can also check the depth. If you look here, I've got some space in there. Can you guys see the space in there? Mm-hmm. So I can glaze that. I'm gonna go a little deeper. And sometimes I have to take it off the wheel and check it and see if it's too thick still. Because it's not giving it all. But listen to this. That's thinner right there than here, so I probably need to stop. There's the inside foot. I don't know if I want this foot to be this wide. This is the thickest part of the whole piece, so I'm going to make it a little bit thinner. You got to be really careful when you do something like that because you can trim through that foot. And if you trim through the foot, you might just have to throw your piece away. If a lot of students will trim through their foot and then they're like, oh, what can I do? So they try to add a coil on there. It usually doesn't stick because so you threw the bowl one direction, you turn it over and you put a coil on it, you're putting the foot on the opposite direction, so they unwind in the kiln and they usually crack off. So.
Does it stand a better chance if you try and do the same direction? Because clay memory.
You could. I think the best thing you can do is, if you're doing a pedestal foot, you just need to do it at the right, when it's fairly soft. Like you want to trim it a little bit soft and then try to put that foot on. But it's hard. They crack a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the chip and dip bowl. It's just notorious for cracking. But I've compressed this round. So when I sponge this off, this will sponge off. Now the other reason you use a bat sometimes, so this is a little tricky to get off here because if I squeeze this foot, I could dent my foot or I dent my rim. So one thing is I can lift it off with the bat, or I use the chamois and I kind of tilt it up like this and you can get your finger underneath very carefully. You can see the foot. I think that feels pretty good. So see how that's working? This curve here follows this curve here. It's a little flat, to be honest, but it's okay. I think it's acceptable. It's like you want to follow that curve. It should be like a curve with a ring on it, but it's, I'm close, but I'm not quite there.
Well, if you're unhappy with it, I'll just take it off your hand.
Yeah. So this one you can look at too. Also, another thing about bowls, and I probably should point this out, when you handle a greenware bowl, this is greenware, and this is greenware. This is leather hard, so it has a lot of strength. This doesn't have strength. The last way you want to hold a bowl, and I talk about this every semester because students do this, is students will see other people's work out there and they're like, oh, I want to see it. So they pick it up like this. And if you pick it up like this, you'll see bowls that are broken like that. So if it's a greenware bowl, pick it up with two hands. Be very careful with it because this is the most fragile state of the whole process is when it's green. Cups, you don't usually hold a handle from a cup when it's green, but like a cylinder, you're not going to break it. But a bowl, you can easily break it. And Brady and I see it all the time. And it's not Brady and I, it's other students touching people's work. And you'll see a chip like this. Because students sometimes, this is pretty consistent, but students tend to be less consistent. It might be really thin, paper thin if that, and then they hold it like this and it goes, snap, it snaps like a cracker. and just like breaks right there.
Do they just put it back on the shelf?
Of
at that
course, they
point?
just leave it there and just like sheepishly walk off.
That's so sad.
How about not touching
But
other
if that
people's
happens,
work?
yeah, the first rule in ceramics is don't touch other people's work, and the second rule is clean up your crap. You know, clean up and don't. That's like you should learn that in kindergarten, right?
Right.
So we're still working on those rules. You know, it happens. Anyways, the bowls. That's how I want you to trim bowls. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No matter what, and I see this a lot. I think you guys are doing a pretty good job of it. After you trim, polish it with your finger. It doesn't take very long. It just softens the edge and it makes it more functional. It'll get sharper. This bowl, if I glaze this bowl, it's a little bit bigger, but it won't fit in the bucket to glaze it, but I can pour glaze, and I'm going to show you how to pour glaze on it. And you also have the foot to hold, so I could hold this foot. If I was to glaze this bowl, this is how I would glaze it. Let's do it with this one so I don't mess that foot up. But let's say this is a bigger bowl and it doesn't fit in the bucket. I would get a pitcher of glaze. I would turn my wrist like this. Here's the bucket. I would hold the pitcher here, pour right here, not in the middle, but here, so it goes all the way through. Pour the pitcher there and then turn. So I'm doing this together, and then I pour it and I'll glaze the whole thing, and it'll come out as evenly as a dip if you do it correctly. And then on the outside, I always glaze the inside first. And then on the outside, this is hard because if it's big enough to dip, you hold it like this and dip it. But since it's a little bit wider than the bucket or close to it, you can get the pitcher and you twist your wrist like this, and you can put the pitcher lip right here and glaze it perfectly all the way around. What I do is I just pour it right here. I'll pour it all the way around like that. Sometimes it goes down your arms, and then I hurry and touch it like this, turn it over, and you'll have a pretty even glaze. And you might have a few dribbles here, but those are gonna melt on the rim and they'll look pretty good. So we can go over that when we get to that point. For those that missed the assignment, you're making 4 bowls, and you're making one of each of the shapes. One of the shapes is the rice bowl, so the walls go vertical. And so I'll just show you like this. We'll do back to the hand signs. So a rice bowl shape. This one's kind of in between a rice and a decorative. A decorative is an angled piece like this, continuous curve. They all have a continuous curve on the inside. They kind of angle. So you got rice, you got decorative, you got salad, and this is the salad bowl. It's either decorative or rice, curved, and then it flattens out and goes horizontal. And then the 4th shape would be this one or that one, in the fact that it's either any of those 3 bowls, but you alter the rim. So you make a spout on it, like a mixing bowl to do your pancakes in. You can put a spout on it. You can just flute the rim like these. You can do whatever you want. You can alter the rim. If your rim is extremely altered, this is symmetrically altered, so it will trim. If it's extremely altered, how do you trim it? You make a chuck. And so instead of making a cone chuck, you make kind of a cylinder chuck. You can make a cone chuck and you just make a little bit of a cylinder, just a little bit, and that hollow part sits right here, and it'll work really well to trim your bowl. So there's always a way to do it if we have to figure it out. Bowls are round, so they're not oval. We'll get ovals in intermediate ceramics. Any questions with bowls? So I gave 2 assignments on Tuesday. One is we're doing cups and handles. I can review handles at any time. I did show 3 different cups. I showed a cylinder